Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're going deep on Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck, which, and I'm sure you know this already, but it's not about being a jerk to everyone.
Yeah, definitely not.
And I think a lot of our listeners are probably drawn to this one because they're, well, we all are, looking for ways to deal with all the craziness of the world without, getting overwhelmed and anxious all the time.
Yeah, totally.
And I think Manson has a really different way of going about this, and a big part of that is because of his background.
Yeah, he's not your typical self-help guy, that's for
Gotcha.
sure. Like right off the bat, the book opens with this story about Charles Bukowski, this
Mm.
poet who was super unconventional, kind of hard-living guy, you know.
Oh, yeah, no Bukowski.
And get this, his tombstone literally says, "Don't try."
Wow.
So right away, Manson is like flipping the script on us. What we think we know about success and what it means to live a good life.
I think that's what really got me hooked, too. It's this idea that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to win all the time to be happy. Maybe it's more about accepting yourself, like
Yeah.
even with all your flaws and everything.
Right, totally.
And that kind of leads us to this main idea of the book, this whole not giving a feck thing. But what does that even mean?
It's all about choosing your battles. Because think about it, we're told to care about like everything all the time.
Yeah.
How we look, our status, what people think of us. It's exhausting.
Absolutely.
And Manson's argument is that all this pressure, it actually creates this thing he calls the feedback loop from hell.
Okay, so let's break that down. What is this feedback loop from hell?
Okay, so picture this. You're feeling bad about something. Like maybe you didn't get that job you really wanted,
Yeah.
or a date went totally wrong. But then yet, you start feeling bad about feeling bad.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling.
It's like you beat yourself up
All right.
for not being more positive or not getting over it fast enough.
Yeah.
And it just creates this downward spiral where you're
Yeah.
piling on more and more suffering on top of something that's already hard.
So it's like this cycle of judgment that just makes all the bad feelings even worse.
Exactly. And Manson has this funny little metaphor for this. He calls it the disappointment panda.
The disappointment panda.
Yeah, it's like this little guy in your head who just loves to point out all your flaws and failures.
Oh, man, I know that panda.
Right. But here's the thing. Manson says we shouldn't try to silence the panda.
Really? Why not?
That sounds kind of depressing.
Because those negative feelings, they're actually giving you valuable feedback.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about it this way. When you stub your toe,
Hmm.
that pain is telling you something's wrong.
Right. Don't do that again.
Exactly. Be more careful next time. So in the same way, those emotional pains like disappointment or anxiety, they can be signals that something needs to change. Maybe your values are out of whack or you need to adjust your priorities.
So instead of trying to avoid those feelings, we should be looking at them and saying, what can I learn from this?
Right. Or what needs to change.
I like
It's about understanding that pain is just part of life, both physical and emotional.
Makes sense.
It's a catalyst for growth.
And I think this is where the idea of good problems comes in, right? Manson talks about how we should actually be embracing the challenges, the ones that will help us grow in the long run.
Absolutely. So instead of asking yourself, what am I giving too many frucks about?
Mm.
Maybe ask, what are some good problems I have in my life right now?
That's a good one.
Those challenges that are tough, but ultimately they're pushing you to be better.
It's like a total mind shift.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're starting to see that this whole not giving a feck thing, it's not about apathy.
No,
It's about choosing where to focus your energy, right?
exactly.
And that brings us to another important idea from the book, values and metrics.
Right. Manson says that a lot of times. We're not even aware of what we really value in life or how we're measuring success.
And we kind of do it unconsciously.
Yeah, and if those choices aren't aligned with who we really are, then we end up feeling frustrated and unfulfilled.
It's like we're setting ourselves up to fail.
Exactly.
He gives a great example in the book, this guy who's really insecure about his height,
Oh, yeah.
and he thinks he'll never find a partner because he's not tall enough.
Right. He's giving too many facts about something he can't control.
But as Manson points out, the problem isn't his height, it's the metric he's chosen to measure his worth.
And that's a metric that's guaranteed to make him feel bad.
So how do we choose better metrics then? How do we figure out what values actually match up with who we are?
Well, Manson actually uses a personal story to explain this. He talks about his relationship with his brother, and they're like total opposites, personality-wise. They have completely different views on things.
Yeah, I get that.
But they found a way to connect on a deeper level by shifting their focus. Like instead of getting hung up on all the little disagreements, they started focusing on their shared values.
Like what?
Respect, understanding, family.
Those are big ones.
Yeah. And it just shows you
Yeah.
that We have the power to choose what we value in our relationships.
And how we measure if they're successful.
Exactly.
And I think that leads us to another really important theme in the book, taking responsibility.
Yeah, that's a big one.
But Manson makes this distinction between fault and responsibility. That I thought was really interesting.
Oh, yeah, he's really clear about that. He says taking responsibility isn't about dwelling on the past.
Or blaming yourself.
Right. It's not about that at all. It's about empowering yourself to make changes and move forward.
So it's more about looking ahead.
Exactly.
I like that.
And he actually illustrates this with a pretty personal story about getting cheated on.
Ooh, that's tough.
Yeah. And at first, he was just consumed by anger and blame.
Totally understandable.
But eventually he realized that he also played a role in the whole thing.
Really?
Yeah. Like he started to see how he contributed to the unhealthy dynamic of the relationship.
Wow. So it wasn't about blaming himself.
No, not at all. It was about recognizing his part so he could learn and grow from it.
It makes you wonder, how often are we holding on to resentment or blame for things that happened in the past?
Like, all the time.
And is that actually preventing us from moving on?
It definitely can.
Yeah.
And Manson argues that a lot of this comes from a sense of entitlement.
Like we deserve certain things.
Yeah, we feel like we deserve success, happiness, the perfect partner, whatever.
And when we don't get those things,
We lash out, we blame others.
it's easier than looking at ourselves.
And, in today's world with social media and everything,
It's so easy to get caught up in that comparison game.
oh yeah, it's like everyone's just showing their highlight reel.
So we end up feeling entitled to that same level of perfection.
Exactly. And Manson actually has a name for this. He calls it victimhood chic.
Victimhood chic.
Yeah, where it's almost like victimhood is celebrated or seen as a badge of honor.
Interesting.
And while it's important to validate people's struggles,
Oh, of course.
this mindset can become a problem when it stops us from taking responsibility for our own lives.
Yeah, because if we're always focused on what's been done to us, we miss opportunities to make changes.
Right, we get stuck in that cycle of blame and resentment.
Makes sense?
And it's not just about personal responsibility either. It's about recognizing our own biases and blind spots. Like those things we just don't see about ourselves.
Oh, yeah, we all have those.
He uses this really fascinating story to illustrate this point about this Japanese soldier named Hiru Onoda.
Okay, I've never heard of them.
So Onoda was stationed on this remote island in the Philippines during World War II. And get this, he kept fighting the war for 30 years after it ended.
Wait, 30 years? How is that even possible?
I know, it's crazy, right? He was never officially told that the war was over,
Oh, wow.
and he thought any evidence to the contrary was just enemy propaganda.
So he just kept fighting?
Yeah, for decades, he carried on this guerrilla war against the local population.
Wow, that's both incredible and kind of tragic.
Yeah, it really is. It shows how powerful our beliefs can be.
Like, he was so convinced of his own reality that he couldn't accept the truth even when it was right there in front of him.
And that's the danger of clinging to certainty, the
Sure.
need to be right all the time.
It can really distort how we see the world.
It can stop us from adapting to new information.
And we see this all the time, right?
Oh, yeah. People digging in their heels, refusing to acknowledge facts.
It could be about anything. Politics, religion, relationships.
It doesn't matter. The point is that we get so attached to our beliefs that we're unwilling to consider other perspectives.
So how do we get out of that trap? How do we become more open to new information and different points of view?
Well, Manson suggests that the key is to embrace uncertainty
Okay, I can see how that would help.
and cultivate a sense of curiosity.
Oh, that's good.
It's about asking yourself those tough questions. Like, what if I'm wrong?
Never thought of it that way.
Or would being wrong actually create a better problem?
Okay, explain that one.
So he tells this funny story about a woman named Erin, this self-proclaimed self-improvement junkie. And she was so convinced that she had all the answers that she actually tried to recruit Manson into a polyamorous relationship.
Even though he was engaged?
Yep, already engaged.
Wow, that's a whole other level of certainty.
Right. It just shows how our need to be right can lead us down some pretty crazy paths.
And that brings us to another really important concept from the book, embracing failure.
Ah, yes, the F word.
I think a lot of us struggle with this. We're so afraid of failing that we don't even try.
It's a killer.
But Manson argues that when we're so focused on avoiding failure, we actually miss out on opportunities to learn and grow.
Totally. We get so scared of messing up that we never even give ourselves the chance to succeed.
And he actually uses Picasso as an example, like the famous painter.
Yeah, he talks about how Picasso used to just doodle on napkins.
Napkins.
Yeah, like he found joy in the creative process itself. He wasn't worried about whether those napkin doodles would be considered good or not.
He was just enjoying the act of creating.
Exactly. And Manson calls this the failure-success paradox.
The failure-success paradox.
Yeah, it's the idea that when we're too focused on the outcome
We miss the joy of the journey.
and we set ourselves up for disappointment.
I think we've all been there.
Think about your own life for a second. What are some things you've been afraid to try because you were worried about failing?
Ooh, yeah, good question.
It could be anything, starting a business, writing a book, even having a tough conversation. This fear can really hold us back from so much joy and fulfillment.
So how do we shift our perspective on failure then? How do we start to see it as a necessary part of growth and learning?
Well, Manson's own life is a great example. He talks about how his early failures, like flunking out of college, struggling to find his path,
Those are big ones.
they actually set him up for success later on.
Really?
Yeah, he learned resilience, adaptability, and the importance of not taking himself too seriously.
So like those early failures gave him a sense of freedom to experiment and try new things without being afraid of judgment.
Exactly. He had nothing to lose, so taking risks was less scary.
And that kind of leads us to this really big question that Manson tackles in the book. What's the meaning of life?
Especially in the face of death.
Yeah, it's a heavy topic, but it's something we all think about at some point,
Absolutely.
and it's not something we can just avoid.
Especially as we get older or experience loss in our lives.
It can be really hard to face that,
Yeah,
that we're not going to live forever.
totally. And Manson actually gets really personal about this in the book. He talks about the death of his friend Josh and how that experience really forced him to confront his own mortality.
That must have been incredibly tough.
It was, and he talks about how it made him realize just how precious our time is and how easy it is to get caught up in all the little anxieties and forget that.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
And he connects this experience to this theory by Ernest Becker called denial of death.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah. So the idea is that because death is so terrifying, we try to create a sense of immortality through other things, our achievements, our possessions, even like how many followers we have online.
So it's like we're trying to build these little monuments to ourselves, to distract ourselves from the fact that we're all going to die someday.
Exactly, these immortality projects.
And these projects can be anything, really.
Anything that makes us feel like we're leaving a mark on the world.
But Manson argues that this denial is actually keeping us from really living.
It is, because when we're so focused on achieving all these things or leaving behind a legacy, we lose sight of what really matters in this moment.
So what's the alternative then? How can we embrace our mortality without falling into despair?
Well, Manson suggests that true freedom comes from accepting it, not denying it.
So instead of running from it, we face it head on.
Exactly, because when we acknowledge that our time is limited, we can start making choices that are aligned with our true values.
So we're not trying to prove anything to anyone anymore.
Right, it's not about leaving a mark or building a legacy. It's about living a life that's meaningful to you right now.
I love that. It's so simple, but so profound.
It is, and it brings us back to this whole idea of not giving effect.
Yeah, it all ties together.
It's not about being apathetic. It's about choosing what you truly care about and letting go of everything else.
And accepting that you can't control everything.
Right, and that's okay.
It's about embracing the uncertainty of life and finding the courage to go after what you want.
Even if it means failing sometimes.
Because ultimately, it's those struggles that shape who we are.
And give our lives meaning.
Manson leaves us with a really powerful question in the book. He asks, what are you willing to struggle for?
It's a great question, because in the end, those are the things that will bring us the most fulfillment.
Regardless of the outcome.
Exactly.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive. I hope it's given everyone listening some new things to think about as you navigate your own lives. Remember, not giving effect isn't about being a jerk. It's about choosing your battles, taking responsibility for your choices, and embracing this crazy, messy, beautiful journey of being human. Thanks for joining us.